Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions.
The latest episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our next incredible guest and somebody who I have been trying, I think, to get on this podcast for around a year now. Heather HERSHEY from IDC. Welcome to the pod.
Hi, thank you for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you along for the ride with me today. And I know how it is with analyst companies and people that are selling research into the industry. It's so hard because legal wants to control everything as it relates to whatever goes out for public consumption. And so we both have to always jump through a bunch of hoops before we can make something like this happen. So I feel quite privileged to have you on the podcast with me today.
Thank you. Yes. And in case anybody's ever wondered what the heck an analyst does and why that sensitivity exists, I'll just give a little bit of a disclaimer up front. I don't know. If you went to grad school and you loved grad school and you loved writing your thesis and defending it, that's what this job basically is, except we get like little pockets of the market to cover. And in my case, it's digital commerce and all that entails. And so the vendors talk to me, their customers talk to me, all under double binding NDA. And so I have to be very careful about how much detail I disclose. But if we talk about really big picture concepts to help your audience, then we're in great shape.
No, I super appreciate that, and I appreciate your willingness to even jump through the hoops with alongside me to be able to make this conversation happen. But before we get into what you do, how you do it, what your contribution to the society of e-com is, which I think is substantial, you tell us how you even got to be in this space in the first place. Because if I go back in your history, all the way back, a contract musician, soprano, a singer at some point in your past, and then recruit communications, then a content strategist, UX strategist, and owner of your own commerce B2C pure play business for almost 13 years.
Yes.
Then you got into being the research director. This is a mouthful, so I'm going to read it so that I don't get it wrong. Research director, worldwide digital commerce strategy, IDC. So,
Yes.
what does that journey look like for you?
It was crazy. Essentially, I've always been really interested in what makes people tick. And honestly, I feel like commerce and economics, they're essentially expressions of how people respond to certain incentives to get what they want or to avoid things they don't want. So it's basically psychology writ large or sociology, depending on your paradigm. And I think that makes it very intriguing because there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of dynamicism baked into that. And so my entire career history is that. If you view that as the through line, it will make sense. And for the record, I still sing on the weekends at various churches as a contract musician. So I'm a
Wow.
operatically trained color tour soprano. And sometimes you can hear it in my voice when I talk. I get a little singy-songy when I'm presenting. But I digress. So I started off as a music major. I was like, okay, I'm not going to make any money doing this. And I pivoted into computational sociology. This was right around the time that Cambridge Analytica was a
Oh,
thing.
that
That
whole
if anybody
story was
remembers the movie.
breaking.
Yeah, so it was right before that, actually. I was right on the cusp because it was merging sociology and AI. And I thought, this is cool. I want to do this because I could study people with really big data sets when big data was new and novel. And I wanted to be on the forefront of that. And then Cambridge Analytica hit. That entire side of AI took a big hit. And I decided I needed to pivot. So my academic background shows this kind of confluence of music, sociology, and then also AI. And my master's is in AI. And so I got a job immediately out of college at a division of IPG McCann World Group in their IT department of all places, rose through the ranks as like a tier one help desk person to like being the systems admin very quickly within about 2.5 years, and just kept building and building simultaneously this mindset for how people tick, what compels people to buy, that sort of thing, and then also IT. So that's why I feel like being an analyst is a really nice blend of both worlds, because part of my ace in the pocket and why I think I was awarded the title of Analyst of the Year 2024 Americas by IAR last year was because I'm very good at taking these very dense technical topics and then distilling them into something that is business friendly without losing the thread of relevancy for those readers.
Wow, what a job you have. And if we look at the, I guess, the landscape, let's call it the landscape of analysts that primarily operate in the e-commerce space, but they operate in the broader IT space and broader software space. Obviously, I consider IDC one of the three heavy hitters in the space.
Mm.
We've typically you would typically be grouped together with IDC, Gartner, and Forrester.
Yeah.
And if you're a software vendor, you're probably going to try to get you at some point. And when you get to a certain scale, you get to a certain size, you're probably going to try to get into one or all of those analyst reports at some point in your software career. And tell us maybe what some of the I have my own take on this, but I'd love your take. What do you think the net benefit to these software vendors of getting on analysts' radar to begin with? What is the net benefit to them of getting on someone like you, getting on your radar?
I think the benefit of getting on our radar really is more for mid-market and smaller vendors, emerging vendors, because they need the visibility and they want to talk to the people that the big vendors are talking to. For the big vendors, I think that the value prop is a little bit different. And may just be my perspective in my practice, because every single analyst practice is a little bit different. In my practice, I think the big benefit to the bigger vendors is that I'm talking to everybody they want to partner with, whether that is a systems integration firm, a consultancy firm, or another software vendor in an adjacent sort of field. So in commerce, that could be a CPQ, a PIM, a PXM. It could be a
Order
discovery engine.
management could be anything.
Absolutely. It could be a number of, and I'm talking to all of those vendors, the ISVs and the big commerce products and the ERP vendors. I'm talking to all of them to create these elaborate integrated ecosystems for commerce. So that's one big part of the value prop, because they can see what's happening in other fields that may be cannibalizing from their business or that they may be wanting to partner with. And then because I'm also talking to the smaller, more emerging vendors that want a piece of the action, they can get a feel for what is happening in the broader competitive landscape. Now, of course, as I mentioned at the top, I'm bound by NDAs very strongly. And so I can't disclose details. And you'll see that in some of our reports, like IDC Marketscapes. Like, we don't go into a lot of granular details about capabilities and roadmaps because of that NDA factor. But it's our job to know it, to know the distinctions, to know why they matter, and then to provide the level of detail permissible under that framework to those larger vendors and everyone else who may be willing to pay for our intelligence service. That's why internally we call them continuous information services, because basically we're like little corporate friends that listen to everybody's problems and then try to soothe them over for everybody and tell them what's coming down the pipeline.
And how do you keep your finger on the pulse of what's important to the buyers of this kind of software? Like, how do you, because obviously this is a moving target too. So, what was important, for example, to a B2B e-commerce platform buyer 2 or 3 years ago is definitely not the same as what it is today. And in many cases, the expectations increase over time around there's terms for this, but packaged business capabilities that a
Yeah.
specific piece of software brings to market. The expectation tends to rise over time of what any single piece of software can do, particularly in a suite-based world, which is what a lot of software is today. Modular, I call it like a modular monolith.
Oh.
And so how do you understand the evolving expectations of the buying market so that your research aligns with supporting their buying process so that it's relevant to them as they go through that journey?
Believe it or not, I think it's pretty easy for me because I spend way more time focusing on the buyers than I do the vendors. The vendors put themselves in front of me. The vendors
Oh,
are the ones who book time with me, but I go out of my way to talk to, for example, consultancy and systems integration firms that are talking to people on the ground level. Whenever I go to events, I'm interviewing everybody, and they may not know it, but I
yeah,
am.
sure.
I'm sitting
Yeah.
there at the bar, I'm interviewing them, buying them drinks. I'm in the elevator, I'm asking them what they do and if they've played with this particular software, right? Like, it's constant. I go to Reddit, I go to Medium, I'm going to LinkedIn and looking at what
Laura,
they say. Absolutely, absolutely. Even though each of these platforms has their own little pros and cons and slightly different audience bases, I think that there's a lot of really good mojo in what people say when they're frustrated or when they're really happy and when they think they're talking to peers and not necessarily their bosses or to the vendors themselves directly. And so that's another part of this, is that I don't necessarily funnel direct feedback to the vendors because it violates the trust of the buyers that I'm talking to. But I talk to them obsessively. And most of the documents that I generate and most of the presentations I deliver are focused specifically on the buyers.
and how much of that research also focuses on the post-purchase experience, meaning, okay, here's the hype, here's the reality, here's the hype, we bought the hype, we bought the buzz, we bought the sizzle, not the steak. Now we're having to eat the steak, we're having to onboard the steak, we're having to get put into post-production with the steak, and either it has or it hasn't maybe lived up to our expectations, or it was more challenging than we thought, or it took longer than we thought, or whatever. Like, how much of that conversation is, okay, what is your pre-purchase experience look like, and what are some of the criteria that you as a buyer are looking for in this category of software, for lack of a better term, before you make your purchase? And then how much of that research is, okay, cool, you went through this really structured process, maybe even RFP, maybe even multiple demos, maybe it was even led by a consultant or an SI. Okay, but now we're at the stage where the rubber meets the road, and I want to really hear what that feels like as a software buyer.
That latter bit, the post-purchase, is what I focus on almost explicitly, and it's because the pre-purchased phases are really controlled by the brands and the vendors in many cases, and they have a lot of control over how much you as a buyer, what you're getting into and what that experience is going to look like, and they'll promise a lot.
I call it the asymmetry of information in the
Yeah.
when the vendor has an asymmetrical power play in the relationship.
Yes, and the other thing is, frankly, sometimes there's just squishy human wetware error as well. Like, the salesperson in that role may not know the limitations of the platform that well, and so they may be inclined to oversell it, right? I'm inclined to believe there might be a little bit of error in there as well, as opposed to a nefarious intent. But I think that the post-purchase is really where I am most potent and what I'm really most interested in because, oh my gosh, customers love talking to me because they love telling me where all the bodies are buried. This is what I was promised. This is what I didn't get. And especially when they come to me after they've tried numerous CPQs, numerous commerce platforms, et cetera, right? Like, they're so frustrated because they know exactly what it is at that stage, what they're looking for, and that no one seems to have it. And then they come to talk to someone like me to see if that actually even exists in the market or if they have to have it custom built for them.
And how you may not be able to go into too much detail here, but I hear a lot of scuttlebutt. I've never worked with I have a lot of platform vendors as clients, but I've never helped them or tried to help them get onto somebody like I don't typically go through a process of trying to get them into analysts reports or anything like that. So I don't fully understand the inner workings of the industry.
Mhm.
Seems it almost seems like a dark art, the industry, and it almost seems it's almost like when if you went to con, you almost have to be in that world to be able to understand how that world works, to be able to understand how to get your art in front of the right people so that it gets the right exposure on the right stage. Otherwise, you never get to break into that industry, so to speak. And so, and there's been a lot of people, not necessarily me, there's been a lot of people in the software space who have said, "Oh, those analysts, oh, I don't even bother even trying to engage with them anymore because oh, it's all pay to play. Basically, the more you pay,
Yeah.
the higher you're going to get ranked." And I hear that so often that it almost feels like there's some sort of smoky backroom analyst space where you have to bid the most to get onto analysts' radar. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine that wouldn't have been regulated at some point if that was true.
Yeah, here's the deal. I understand where that appearance, like that patina of impropriety would creep into the equation. And I think part of that stems from a hyper focus on those sort of 2 by 2 competitive analysis reports, not to single any of them out because they all suffer from the same Achilles heel from my perspective, and that's that they're purporting to be buyer-facing documents, but the primary buyer is the vendor. And so we have no choice but to collaborate very closely with the vendors. And I have to tell you, every analyst is different, every analyst firm is different, but I am personally not necessarily pugilistic, but I'm not afraid to be eager to
Rough
push
around the
boundaries.
edges,
Yeah.
push elbows.
I'm a little scrappy. I'm a little annoying. And it's because I have very strict boundaries, as we're supposed to have in the role when we're doing a lot of MQs or waves, or in my case, IDC marketscapes, right? Like, we have to push back on the vendors when they try to launder their marketing narratives through us. And it does extend the timeline for those reports. It does make it a very difficult exercise for both parties. And there are different things that I try to do personally to try to ameliorate that and build trust with the vendors. But if the only reason why a vendor is talking to an analyst is to launder their marketing narratives through us, they're going to be in for a very rough ride, because any of the analysts that take their job seriously, like I do, are going to be eager for the fight. We're primed for it. We're trained on how to do it. And frankly, we're the kind of obnoxious people at parties that live for debate. Bring it is the mentality I have about it. But I'd prefer not to. I'd prefer to make it collaborative, make it copacetic, and everybody knows what they're getting into. What I prefer is when people and vendors engage with me because they want to share knowledge, right? They want to tell me about their product. They want to tell me what they're seeing in the future. They want to tell me what their fears are about how relevant their product may or may not be based on their roadmap and their current capability set. I think that is a much more productive use of their time, because if they're really onto something, I am happy to extend my research beyond just the confines of, for example, B2B enterprise, top of the market. I'm happy to extend that because, frankly, most digital commerce platforms, if you look at them really and are honest about it, they're built mainly for the mid-market and
Mid-market.
below.
Yeah. It's very few true enterprise commerce platforms.
Absolutely. So I'm in a privileged position where I can look at SMB, I can look at mid-market, and I can study those, which means that smaller emerging vendors that are really onto something new, novel, innovative, I can write about them, I can focus on them, but it has to be real. It can't just be, oh, we want to do this and we have a brand. Cool. So does everybody else.
In other words, don't come to me with your vaporware bullshit.
Right on, right on. And also don't try to force me to adopt your point of view, because that's not going to work. Like, people don't land these positions as analysts without being excellent critical thinkers. And it's a way to really sour that relationship with the analyst if you get too forceful about your point of view. And unfortunately, that is exactly why some companies hire AR professionals, is specifically just to cram marketing narratives down an analyst's throat. And we are trained on how to avoid that. So I think, and frankly, we have very strict rules of engagement, not only about things like NDA, but also the language that we use in reports. Like, for example, if a vendor makes a claim in a piece of custom, right? Because we do a lot of custom work as well and custom research. If they try to get me to say something that I can't validate with data, I'm not going to say it, or I will say it in such a broad fashion that it's clear that it is a hypothetical, like potentially this will produce revenue uplift, but I'm not going to say definitively it will, because if there's no data, like, it's almost a work of fiction. Like, I have to assume that it is.
And who would you say typically is the buyer of your research? Is it the people that are trying to cure software, and so they want to be able to dive deep into the category of where that they're buying, and they want to make as informed of a buying decision as possible? Is it the vendors themselves because they want to make sure they want to better understand the fit in the landscape? Maybe some of the blue ocean opportunities sit versus the red ocean opportunities. Is it that they want bespoke research done so that they can then publish that in sort of collaboration with you, which gives more validity or maybe more respect to the research versus something that was produced internally with no third party sort of review or stamp of approval? Where do you feel like you do your best work, and where is your typical target market sit for that research?
Yeah, I think those are two really great questions. So I'll tackle the first bit first. And that's that at IDC, I mean, we're fairly unique in that the analysts do a lot for a lot of different potential buyers. Like, we do custom research on behalf of vendors. We do consulting calls with buyers directly. That's not something that is normally baked into an analyst role at most of the tier one firms. And then I also do a lot of presentations, podcasts, webinars, things of that nature that could be for buyers, could be for vendors, could be a blend of both. Like, for example, when I go and speak in person at a vendor event, usually the audience is full of all of the product team leads and engineers, because they know I'm geeky. And from that vendor, as well as partners, SIs, buyers, it's a really healthy mix usually that tends to gravitate towards me as an analyst and what I am presenting. The audience is a really healthy blend, I think. When it comes to the market intelligence aspect of things, that's definitely vendor facing. That's geared towards them, and IDC has numerous products for that, including that subscription service that I mentioned. But then the actual custom research, that's typically vendor facing, but it could also be an investment bank. It could also be an SI. It could be a number of different parties that are asking for that kind of bespoke market research. And then again, I do consulting all the time with buyers. Usually the motion goes something like this. They'll talk to your BCG, McKinsey, Accenture, Deloitte. They'll talk to numerous firms. They'll get numerous quotes. Then they'll come to somebody like me to go, okay, does this pass the sniff test? Are any of these quotes good? Do you recommend any of these pathways? Or usually, what I'm more likely to see is they'll play their cards really close to the vest and they'll just ask me what I think and then use that as validation for what they're seeing from those consultancy firms. And yeah, and those are some of my favorite conversations too, because I have to play like Sherlock Holmes to figure out what they are actually angling for.
Yeah. Yep. Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt. How often does original research, meaning, okay, I don't know, I'm a commerce vendor. I've been in the market for 5 years. I want to commission some original research. I don't know. Let's say hypothetically, I'm a Shopify and I've seen some of the research they put out at different points in their life cycle where they say, hey, we have independent research that shows our native checkout converts at 5x what our nearest competitor does.
Yeah.
And so they will commission some original research, not necessarily by you, but maybe someone in your industry. And that feels like the reason that they would do that. And they might have this data at their fingertips internally within the
We can't
business,
use it.
but they can't use it until
We
it's
can't
been
use it.
validated by a third party.
Like literally, we can't use it. And if they want us to validate it, they have to give us a survey budget. They have to give us the budget to go get that data to back it up. So they can't micromanage that process or tell us what to say. They can just ask us to validate the claim. And then if we validate it with that effort that they would have to pay for, then we can write something about it. So that would be like a custom survey or something like that. But we have very strict rules of engagement. I never use the vendor data. They try, but I don't use it. And in fact, it's part of my job when I see some of the vendors and I know exactly what you're talking about where they talk about their revenue uplift. I'm the first person probably that jumping on that email going, how did you do this? What's your methodology? Who were you actually polling? How do you know?
Yes.
And they can't answer that. They don't want to answer about the methodology because
Yes.
they're not as likely to scrutinize it as someone like me would be.
So effectively, what it sounds like is they might give you a hypothesis. What they see as research, you would see as a hypothesis. Then you then go and say, okay, here's the hypothesis. Here's what we would need to do to validate this hypothesis. Do you want to pay for us to run that original research process or
Yes.
not? And if you do, great, we'll run the research process and the chips are going to fall where they may. And then from there, you can decide whether to publish this research or not.
Yeah, but usually that's where the conversation stops because they don't actually want us to validate it. They want us to just use whatever that data point was and just shout about it from the high heavens. Now, there are a few that do have a high level of integrity all throughout their marketing and all throughout their product teams. And for those vendors, I usually try to recommend an asset that would get them what they're looking for, not the exact stat that they're looking for, because I can't make those kind of promises up front, but will get them the information that would be needful to make those kinds of things more realistic. And one of the assets I really like at IDC is a business value white paper because we ask numerous customers of that particular vendor very specific questions and then do internal calculations about what we see as the perceived revenue uplift. And then that's something that we can produce into a paper for them. But sometimes those results are really dramatic. Sometimes they're not. And by that point, you've already paid quite a considerable sum of money for a white paper. And we try to make that work as best we can, but we can't promise results up front because that kind of negates the point of the exercise.
And are you expected, as part of your role within the business, are you expected internally to productize or come to market or to propose new marketable research products by you and your team? Are you like, I'm guessing that when you started the role, they might not have had a white paper product, or they might not have had some of the different products that you contribute to today. Are you expected to evolve your offering to the market as time goes on? Because presumably, not only do buyers' expectations change over time, but what the market needs from a research support perspective evolves over time. And are you expected to productize or come up with new ideas around how to productize your research and have a GTM play around those products?
I think there are two different levels to this, right? I think that the main way that I influence the products themselves is because I produce the products, right? I'm producing the research. So I get a lot of influence directly in that regard. When it comes to the actual research vehicles themselves and the methodology and those things and creating something whole cloth, brand new, we have an entire product team at IDC, but they are very open to suggestions. If I were to come up with a framework and I were to pitch it to them, they would be receptive to listening to that if they thought it would have broader utility across the organization and all the analysts in it. That's one thing I really have to say is a big deal at IDC. They're very open to hearing those suggestions from the analyst community. And actually, there are two new products that just came out within the last year to 18 months that reflect this. One being the Productscape, which is like the capabilities axis of a MarketScape on steroids. It does go into a lot more specificity and detail, and it only focuses on capabilities, which I think is pretty cool. But it's definitely meant to be a buyer's guide. And then the other one is TechMatch, which is IDC's new AI platform, which basically takes information from analysts like me and then distills it into something that is very similar to like G2, but it's a little bit more granular and it's got a little bit more insider information that is heavily vetted and then filtered through the lens of that NDA. So
Yes.
this way we're
Yeah.
not surfacing anything too sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the difference is yours is analyst-led versus something like a G2, which is peer-led. So
Right.
I guess that's the key differentiator.
Correct. And they're building out that platform all the time. So it's actually a pretty cool new offering. But I do want to express the caveat that it is not a replacement for working with the analyst because it's still getting the data from us.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And when you release, first of all, it sounds based on your title that what falls under your purview from a category perspective is pretty damn broad, right?
Yeah.
So how do you internally decide when, for example, would a PIM system fall under your purview or
Yes.
under a standard internal business system I'm guessing you've got many analysts within your org, many specialists within your org that specialize in either very niche or very broad software categories. What I'm saying, who determines in the org which pieces of software fall under your purview?
We negotiate that, and it's a continuous negotiation process because these markets move very quickly and some product categories move faster than others. For example, I lead the CPQ research at IDC, but I don't own it. Like I help other analysts navigate that as well. And so I work with Tiffany McCormick, who handles digital monetization and business models in her practice. So you can see there's quite a bit of alignment and overlap with commerce right away in that. And then I also work with our B2B digital commerce specialist, Mark Hassisid, who works out of our Milan office. And he's basically focusing on manufacturing focused B2B use cases for digital commerce. And so there's a lot of synergy when you marry all three of those practice areas under the banner of digital commerce leading that kind of research. With PIM, for example, that's another one where that requires quite a bit of internal negotiation because obviously product information is really important in commerce. So I own that research. I own that category internally, but I share it with another analyst named Stuart Bond, who covers MDM and all of those domains under MDM, except the product data, which comes over to me.
Wow. Yeah, because normally in the market, PIM MDM are oftentimes sold together.
Yeah.
Most PIM platforms will say, no, we're a PIM MDM, or maybe we're a PIM MDM and syndication platform.
Yes. And part of my task in dealing with that category is getting to all those little nitpicky details. In fact, I put out a report last quarter about who should buy MDM, PIM, PX, DAM, like DXP, just going into the nitty-gritty details of all the overlapping functionality and which of these platforms is really best for which use cases and what kind of businesses. Because I think it's really easy for people like us, and I'm sorry if I'm overstating my boundaries here, but it's really easy for those of us who are in the trenches day to take it for granted how much or how little the buyers may know about these kind of opaque acronyms and the distinctions between all these products.
And what is the raw material for your research? Is it video demos of the products? Is it literal physical demos that the vendors are providing? Is it a demo followed by, oh, here's an admin login, go and play in the back end of these platforms because you need to actually see what it feels like in practice to use these platforms? What is the raw material feeding this research machine?
It's a lot. I take in a lot of information from the market. For example, I love PitchBook, Morningstar, taking in signals from publicly traded companies in that regard. Privately traded companies, a little bit more tricky. I frequently survey them to ask them for revenue information because I own the market modeling for the software tracker for digital commerce and order management systems at IDC. And so there's a lot of that going on. I do get demos and briefings, usually not in the form of videos. They're usually live calls, so I can ask a lot of questions. And in fact, the vendors, to their great credit, often will preface those conversations by stating very specifically that they want it to be conversational. They want us to interrupt them. I love that because it's a lot harder when, and you could tell, by the way, like I mentioned earlier, how sometimes we don't like it when the vendors want to try to launder their marketing narratives through us and they try to force feed us these branding narratives. You can tell which ones have that in mind because they don't like it when you ask them questions and tear them away from their PowerPoint. It makes them really uncomfortable. That's part of what you're supposed to do when you're an analyst. You're supposed to interrupt people and ask them questions to get beyond just the very basics. So, just a little tip to anybody listening who's never interacted with an analyst but wants to, be prepared to be interrupted and embrace it because what we're really trying to do is help you. And we can't do that if you don't deviate from your carefully curated talking points. But then the other thing is I'm very hands-on, right? Like I have a technical background. And so because of that, if I can get the community version of something like a Kenio or launch a BigCommerce or Shopify store and get in there and build an API and play around with the dev tools. I'm going to do that because there's no better way to speak about the limitations of a product than when you come up against them firsthand. Now, that is very time consuming, so I can't do that 100% of the time, but that's my favorite part of the job, honestly, is just getting in there in the sandbox and messing around.
Yeah, I love that. And even as an enterprise architect and solution architect in the commerce world, that's how I've always learned how to architect on a platform is, okay, cool. Let's actually get a demo login, even if it's a SaaS platform, stand me up an instance of this software, give me an admin login and let me go in there and let me play because that's the only way. And I'll literally go through every single admin function,
Mhm.
step by step, tab by tab, sub tab by sub tab. I'll do it. I'll maybe make some postman calls to the API to make sure that it does what it says it can do. There's nothing better than actually being able to put a piece of software through its actual paces in a practical sense for you to really start to understand what the customer experience is going to be like once they buy that product and once they pay for that product. And I think I get the sense that not all analysts are necessarily as hands-on as that.
I would argue most probably aren't, at least not at this stage in their career, because they may have been prior to going into the role, but it's not prerequisite and it's not required that they actually engage with the technology that they are assessing. But I think that while we're in the minority, there are a fair few of us out there who really like to be hands-on with the research. It doesn't necessarily accelerate the process because it is time consuming to get in there, but what it does is I feel like it is the most helpful thing that I do for the vendors because they're expecting me to tell them when their baby is ugly. And I can do that better and in more constructive ways and give them ideas about how to make that improvement and make it really impactful for their buyers if I can speak to it very specifically instead of just saying, do you have this really broad conceptual feature thing that I've been seeing many people demo?
I think you've just hit on maybe this is the single biggest learning that I've gotten from our conversation so far that really now I understand. Because, like I said, I've always looked at the analyst world as a bit of the dark arts thing this year. It's like a special club that if you ain't
Yeah.
in it, you ain't in it. And I think you just identified for me one of the reasons why when the latest quadrant or wave or whatever it is that comes out, I sometimes either a new platform or a platform that I've had a lot of experience with pops up somewhere in the rankings where I go, that makes, I've been in this industry for 25 years. And I go, this makes zero sense to me because I work with this platform every single day and it doesn't do that. It's crap at that. And yet they rank really highly for something that I think, did the analyst even demo that functionality? Because to me, there's no possible way they could rank it highly for that if they ever actually used that piece of functionality as opposed to just listened to what someone else said that functionality did. And so I think that seems to me to be the potential biggest disconnect in the analyst world is people that are not capable enough of being able to properly demo and use and try and test drive a piece of software because they don't have a background in it necessarily. And so they're asked to put together original research on something that they are not an expert in themselves. And I think that's the disconnect that outsiders outside of the industry see. And we're left scratching our heads sometimes. And I come from an SI world. I was run and built many agencies. And so I think that is the primary disconnect that those of us not in the analyst world see, and maybe try to call out wherever we can.
Yeah, and I see that in the thought leadership in places like LinkedIn. Anytime one of those big reports lands, there's always a little bit of controversy around who ended up in the leaders or whatever category. And in my case, I invite it, right? Like, I'm not perfect, and there are certain product categories that I'm much stronger in than others. I'm not going to be able to stand up an instance of a CPQ to test it out, right? Like the integration.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Just
and the
fraud,
rules and all that. Yeah, and the core data set and everything else.
And then a lot of that is based on how strongly the vendors gatekeep me from
Mhm.
seeing how the product actually functions, right? Because they will do that sometimes. And then I have to go out in the wild and try to hunt for that information in other people's thought leadership, which is fraught in and of itself. But I think that, again, results may vary. Every analyst is different. Every analyst's background is different. At IDC, for example, we all have bio pages. I would suggest before engaging with an analyst, check out that bio page. See if that person's background is a good mesh for what it is that you're actually expecting to get out of the engagement. Because some vendors may want someone that has a more objective point of view and does not have that hands-on experience, and that may work to their advantage. But some, particularly I would argue in very unfortunately commoditized and mature markets like the ones that I cover, those little details that come from the practitioner side of things really matter. And so I think my bio would really sing to vendors who are looking for that.
Yeah, and I guess to someone like me as an outsider, because I'm not an analyst and I don't work in the analyst world, to me, someone like you, your research would by definition carry more weight with someone like me, who's also highly technical, who is a consultant in the space, who dives deep. Well, I have to dive deep on these
Mhm.
technologies on behalf of my customers. When I'm running a search and select process on their behalf, I have to.
Right
And
on.
even if it's a technology that I haven't directly worked with before. And so I have to be able to get to the nitty gritty of what that platform can do really fast on behalf of my customer. When we're running demos, the customer usually doesn't know the questions to ask, but I do. And
Right.
so I need to attend those demos and I need to shepherd those demos and I need to cut through the bullshit on behalf of the customer.
Sure.
And so I feel like someone like you would resonate, or your research would typically resonate more with someone like me than on the flip side. I guess let's say I was a buyer of software. I don't know, I was a head of business systems or something at a company. And I was trying to really just look for research to validate a decision I already wanted to make anyway. Then in that scenario, I might be looking for, I'm just going to be sifting through all the reports that are out there to
No,
try to
it's a
find,
lot, by the
yeah,
way, what you just described.
to try to find the one that validates the position that I was already going to take anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right on. And what you just described about pushing back and knowing the questions, even if the buyer doesn't, that is exactly the role that I take on during vendor calls. And I find it almost like my mission to figure out where where the pesky questions are. Where's the gray area? How do I make it a little bit less ambiguous? And so I take that on as part of my mission is to basically get past the PowerPoint
Mhm.
and to actually ask that. In fact, when I do briefings and whatnot, I generally don't even have a deck because I want to know everything I'm talking about that I don't need to resort to my notes and I don't need to resort to a PowerPoint because I'm so experienced in this. And I think, again, that's very resonant and the vendors appreciate that because I've yet to have one complain that I haven't had a PowerPoint and gone, look, I'm reading exactly what's on this slide.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't. I speak at a lot of conferences, but I don't do PowerPoints. So
Ah,
I'll have maybe one slide up there with just my details, but that's it. And I just go up and I speak from the heart.
right
And
on.
again, I just, because I stay in my lane, it's easy for me to talk off the top of my head because I'm not talking about stuff that I don't know or don't have experience with. And so I think if you stay in a narrow enough lane that's just totally natural, as natural as breathing to you,
Mhm.
probably don't need a 20 slide PowerPoint deck.
That's right. I think and this goes back to just like presentation strategy. I think PowerPoint's best used when you have a chart.
Yeah.
When you have
A
graphic
graphic.
representation of the data or you want to make a humorous point with a picture of a meme or something, But I think that if you really want to be impactful, the less you have on the slide, the better.
Yeah.
And just communicate.
Yeah, I just think if you're gonna have it on the slide, why do I need to be up here to tell it to you?
Exactly. It could have been a PDF.
Yeah, exactly. We could mail this around to everybody. Listen, that's super interesting. What do you think is the next iteration of the analyst space? Do you think there's room for disruption in this world? Do you think it's gonna just carry on with the incumbents doing what they do and everybody having their own little niche that they specialize in? Or do you think that AI, do you think that what is the most exciting thing for you as you look out over the next like 6, 12,
Mm.
8 months of what you do, but more broadly, the industry in general? What gets you the most amped up right now?
I think this is a really exciting question and one that has a kind of complicated answer that I may ramble a bit about, but I will try to do my best. So I think it's already being disrupted. I think it's being disrupted by platforms like Perplexity, for example, right? I think that the more agentic these answer engines, because I don't even want to call them search engines
No,
anymore.
they're answer engines for sure.
Absolutely. So I think the more agentic they become, the more they disrupt the traditional model of what an analyst firm does. And I don't see that as knocking the analyst firms out of the market. It's going to force them to rapidly adapt. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of IDC right now because this may not be the consensus. This is just my personal opinion. But I genuinely think that there's a real opportunity for us to take advantage of that situation because what a lot of these answer engines are really looking for are authoritative third party validation of what a lot of vendors are saying on their own right now about their brands, their products, and their services. And I feel like there's almost like a parallel motion going on right now in search writ large that is similar to what happened in influencer marketing in the 2010s, where you could stand up a page, say on Facebook for your brand, and Facebook would generously just keep funneling customers your way. And anytime you did a paid ad campaign, they would just amp up those stats to sweeten the deal. And it's almost like a drug dealer giving you that first push for free. You get hooked on the sweet sugar, and then you're like, what next? And that's the thing. As soon as the enshittification happens and the monetization model gets turned on, it impacts businesses, B2B, and it is brutal. And it gets a lot more expensive and then you have to do a lot more to get the exact same result or worse result than you were getting previously. I think the exact same thing is going to happen in search. I think that but the difference here is that when the businesses start getting the screws turned to them, they're going to need authoritative sources of validation
To
on a
reference.
scale that they did not need before. Because it's not about the keywords and the search popping up and saying, oh, IDC says this. No, you're going to need it from multiple sources to create a network of contextual relevance and authority around your brand and products that you don't control as the owner of those brands and products. And that is scary if you think about it, but it's also a really great opportunity for analyst firms and people like you to really amp up that thought leadership to create that network of context.
And I think it does create room for platforms like yours and others to seed the market with thought leadership data that then if you want to dig even deeper into that data, that becomes a paid exercise. And I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
I've been doing a bit of quite a lot of original research for one of my clients recently, platform vendor, and I was trying to find some stats from the B2B industry, just some generalized stats, and I was going to build out a narrative around some of those core stats. But what I found is that some of the core stats I was looking for, the most recent version of those statistics were like from 2022. And I'm going, the market has changed so
Yeah.
radically since 2022. Like it could be totally different in 2025 versus 2022. And so I would always, when I made reference to one of those documents, if that was the most recent research I could find, I would put a link to the research or the PDF or whatever it is. But then I would also put a dash and put 2022 because it's the most recent research I could find, just so that the customer would know, okay, this isn't necessarily 2025 research, this is 2022 research. And I feel like you said, because I'm asking very specific questions of ChatGPT, and I'm saying, what is the latest data on this? Right. And then it tells me, and then it provides the link, and then I follow the link. And the other cool thing is, if I happen to find a PDF on the internet of a research paper or something like that. Unlike the old days, if I was trying to find a specific stat in a PDF, I'd have to open it up in Reader. I'd then have to do a Control F. I'd have to look for the keyword. Then I have to try to find that. If it was a 100-page PDF, I'd have to find that, try to find that specific statistic. Then I'd reference that page. Whereas I can upload a PDF to ChatGPT and I can say, summarize that for me. It'll give me 2 paragraphs and I can say, find me this piece of data. And it will tell me it's on page 26 and here it is. And
Yeah.
it'll quote it. And so the ability to parse research today, I think, is so much better in an answer engine world. But to your point, I don't necessarily think all the analysts in sum total are leveraging that to the fullest extent that they could, because people like me will make more reference of their research if it's more easily parsable and not. I
Yeah.
just think there's too much research that is gated, and so
Yes.
therefore it's never going to make it into these answer engines, and so therefore the bespoke research that would drop out of that base research that would be requested by vendors, for example, that request will never get made because they don't know you necessarily have an expertise in that. And I think that's the fine line. That's the fine line that analysts have to tread. How much research do we release for free as a teaser to the market versus how much bespoke research do we do that's that highly paid engagement model?
And the bespoke research, by the way, if we're producing something like a white paper or something like that, that will end up being something searchable because the vendors are usually commissioning that specifically to talk about it publicly. And they will also purchase things like web rights for MarketScape. So our most cited research is generally going to be a MarketScape because that's what they're purchasing most of the time. It's either that or like a market share report or something like that. Big hitting research, or at least by their standards. I have a slightly different opinion. But I think that you're right on. And I think that most of the analyst firms need to start thinking about that internally. I can't really say what our corporate body is doing in that regard, but I do think that you're right on the money that they need to be a little bit more judicious about refining that paywall strategy and seeding the market with information that is ahead in front of that paywall in a little bit more of a generous fashion, because that I know that some of my colleagues hate using the word truth, right? They hate that and they like to stick to like authority or perception or something like that. But I genuinely use the word truth in this scenario because it's like lowercase t
Yes,
as opposed to
yes.
capital truth. And because the whole point is in the digital world, the truth is malleable. And a lot of it's based on authority. A lot of it's based on who's quoting whom and the logos attached to that, et cetera. And I think that we have an opportunity, as do people like you, to frame the truth on behalf of the vendors and on behalf of buyers. We are the ones framing out reality in the digital world in a way that is easily ingested and then transformed via these generative AI platforms. And because I have an AI background, I'm writing in a way that is easily digestible for these platforms by default, right? Because I want them to be ingested in that manner if they're purchased. Just a little plug for my services there.
Man, I
I'm
love
really
it.
thinking about that if somebody wants to buy my papers.
I absolutely love it. Man, an hour has absolutely flown by. This has been a fabulous conversation. I've so appreciated your openness, your honesty, your geniality. You've been amazing. Now, what is the best? I'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile and, of course, to the IDC website into the show notes. But other than that, if people want to speak to you about analytical research, if they want to speak to you about what you do and how you can help them, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Honestly, I think DMing me on LinkedIn is the best way. I recently opened it up so that way anybody could send me a message. For a while there, I was not as eager because it was a lot of B2B
Only
spam.
connections.
Absolutely. But yeah, please, that's a great way to hit me up. Or my email is hhershey@idc.com. And my last name is spelled just like the candy bar.
Love it. Love it. Now, we're at the point where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It could be personal or professional. So, Heather Hershey from IDC, what is your question for me today?
Oh, yeah. I have a juicy one because obviously there's been a lot of tension in the past quarter of going on with the Mock Alliance and what their future looks like. So in full disclosure, I've been associated with them. I'm not a purist by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, I often am very keen to criticize them internally just to help them get better. That's part of my job. But I'm on one of their executive advisory boards. So just a disclosure there. But I'm intrigued to know if you think there's a future for the alliance. And if so, is there any B2B tie-in? Because I feel, and I'll put all my cards on the table here, that they struggle in B2B a little bit. And I think it's because, and again, I'm going to put this out there, and they know that I feel this way, and I've put it in my research, so I'm already on the record stating this. But they need to signal by partnering with some of the big players in legacy technology in B2B before B2B buyers will take them seriously. And I don't know if you think that's true or not, but I should just let you answer and stop answering for you.
No, I love the question. And look, I have been openly highly critical of the Mock Alliance in many instances. I've been openly critical of their myopic view of almost to a degree of religious fervor
Mhm.
around their architectural zealotry. And it historically hasn't left a lot of room for meeting the merchant or the customer where they are and saying, look, if you're not full mock, then you're not using the technology to its best effect, so to speak. And so therefore you're behind. You're a laggard. Basically, if you're not full mock, you're a laggard. Or if you're a technology platform and you're working towards being an API-led platform, but you're not quite fully there yet, and you're not at parity between your APIs, your admin UI, and your CSV capabilities, then you're a crappy legacy platform. And I just don't think the world is as black and white as that. As a consultant, I have to meet my customers where they are. And if I went in with a hard and fast rule about architecture and I said, whatever you say to me, I'm going to be proposing a fully mock approved stack for you, regardless of what you have in place today that I have to try to work around and integrate with, my customers would laugh me out the door. They expect me to meet them where they are, and they expect me to help to roadmap them to a better place and where they want to get to. And look, I've been highly critical. I've got friends within the Mock Alliance and people that I greatly respect within the Mock Alliance. But yet I had Mariano from VTech podcast recently talking about his shot heard around the world and what he published around very publicly leaving the Mock Alliance. But then I've got a podcast episode coming out very shortly with Dirk from Commerce Tools, because I have my own take on things based on 25 years of being in this industry. But the one thing I have learned is that if you take a hard and fast position on almost anything, eventually you'll be proven wrong. So you can't, it's just, you have to be, and it's points in time, right? What worked 2 years ago in our industry, maybe for the same merchant, isn't necessarily going to be the thing that's going to work today for them. And a
Mhm.
lot of that has to do with the ZERP environment and the kind of money that IT teams had to put into IT, where IT budgets crept up north of 8%. That doesn't work today. IT teams will not spend 8% of their overall budget on 8% of revenue on IT. They won't do it. So we need to bring that back down to somewhere circa 3 to 5%. And so does a full mock stack meet those objectives? In many cases, it won't, and it can't, because it's so expensive, it's so complex, and so time consuming to implement, and the amount of internal resources needed to maintain a full mock compliant stack, really difficult. So that was a long way of saying that I think that maybe Mock Alliance had more relevancy a few years ago. I don't see them as relevant maybe today, and I think they're really struggling in the B2B world in particular. I think they just, and especially where in the B2B world, the budgets are even smaller than the retail world, and headless, generally speaking, is a lot less relevant in the B2B world, especially from a storefront perspective. Yeah, that's my answer. My answer is I think they maybe at one time had a really important role to play in the world, much less so today, and I think it remains to be seen whether they still exist. I'm friends with Kelly. Like,
Yeah.
there's lots of people in this industry I respect, but I think that 2 years from now, is mock even still a thing? I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah. Is it okay if I respond to that really quickly?
Please do. Please do.
I'm not gonna refute what you're saying because I've heard many of those same things from buyers, frankly. And I think what goes on with the Mock Alliance and whether or not they succeed, it depends on, frankly, how tied to CX they are, right? Because a lot of their current value prop is very CX oriented. And if these discovery platforms take over most of the front end processes of the customer journey, then that value prop is DOA, right? Think we're not going to see a world where websites don't matter, but the analogy I like to use is like product catalogs were to websites in the former paradigm, the way websites will be to agentic platforms for discovery in the future.
Totally.
And I think that the Mock Alliance, as long as they're on top of that, and they start considering what the world actually looks like in technology right? If a lot of companies are doing things like inverse Conway maneuvers, consolidated platforms are going to be all the rage. Does that leave them out in the cold? And I think that these are issues that they are contending with right now. And to their great credit, they are aware of it. So whether or not they're going to be around, I think they will be, but I think they still have to figure out what the narrative theme is. Because as you so rightly put it, they had a really great moment during COVID.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
Couldn't agree
because
more.
we were shooting fish in a barrel, right?
Yeah.
We're not in that world anymore. And so we have to think more unified. We have to think more omni-channel. We have to think B2B and B2C at the same time. We have to think a lot of different things and a lot of potentialities. And frankly, we have to think about a world where we're not creating the content for commerce, where these agents are creating the content for commerce based on the product attributes in our catalog and inventory availability and pricing and things like that, where we lose control to a certain degree over what it is that we are doing in the digital world. And all we can do is influence.
Particularly in a world where the major buy-side platforms in the B2B world, especially e-procurement platforms, the
Mm.
Jabas and the Aribas, as they become agentically driven by the buy side, they have to have something to connect to on the sell
Yes.
side. And the reality is that the sell side has to be agentically enabled.
Absolutely.
And so that cuts out your account managers, your SDRs, your BDRs, et cetera, in the B2B world, because now it's an agent asking questions of an agent, not a human asking questions of a human. And I think that's the transition that the B2B world is not ready for yet. And
Yeah.
so it's a big discussion that I'm having with my clients every single day, and it's a fun one, and it's fun to prognosticate about, but I'm not even 100% sure that MCP is the final agentic model that's gonna become universalized yet. So
Mm.
it's a fun one to play a part in and try to help shape the conversation and at least try to ask super smart questions of the vendors along the way and to try to help inform their roadmaps. So, yeah, I think you and I both hopefully will have a part to play in helping our industry get to that next stage of growth.
Yeah. It's very exciting, isn't it?
I love it. I love it. It's the biggest disruption to our industry since mobile, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree with you because I know where a lot of cynicism will come in. I'm like, is this the metaverse again? No,
Yeah.
it's not. And
No,
particularly with B2B customers, I feel like when I'm talking to them, they've had the luxury of lag for a
totally.
lot of these technology flash in the pans. This is not that. It's accelerating. Take that exponential growth curve seriously because honestly, you're leaving an opportunity for B2C to pivot into B2B and disrupt you in an inverse motion of what's been going on when B2B does D2C.
I couldn't agree more. Listen, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've totally, thoroughly enjoyed it. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Jason. It's been a blast.
If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.